Cars today are safer than ever, but getting here meant learning some hard lessons. Throughout automotive history, manufacturers tried all sorts of wild ideas to protect passengers, and some of them turned out to be spectacularly bad. We're talking about safety features that actually made things worse, innovations that sounded brilliant on paper but failed catastrophically in the real world. From ejector seats to automatic seatbelts that strangled people, these 25 banned car safety features prove that sometimes the cure really is worse than the disease. And hey, if you're into bizarre automotive history and want to see more content like this, go ahead and smash that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't regret it. All right, let's dive into these automotive nightmares. First up, we've got the windshield-mounted seatbelts. Back in the late 80s, some manufacturers thought it would be genius to attach seatbelts to the door frame and windshield pillar. The idea was that they'd automatically be in position when you got in. Sounds convenient, right? Wrong. In rollover accidents, these mounting points would fail catastrophically. The windshield pillar would crumple, and suddenly your seatbelt wasn't attached to anything. Even worse, in side impact collisions, the forces would tear the mounting hardware right through the windshield. Regulators banned this design after multiple fatalities, proved that seatbelts need to be anchored to the vehicle's main structure, not the glass and trim pieces. Moving on to automatic motorized seatbelts. Remember those? You'd get in your car, start the engine, and this mechanical contraption would drag the shoulder belt along a track from the door to the pillar. Seemed like a great way to make sure people wore seatbelts without thinking about it. The problem was these systems were incredibly unreliable and dangerous. They'd malfunction and keep tightening around people's necks, essentially strangling drivers. Others would fail to release during accidents, trapping people in burning or sinking vehicles. Parents reported kids getting tangled in them. The motors would burn out, leaving you with no working seatbelt at all. After numerous injuries and several deaths, regulations essentially killed these systems by requiring proper manual belts in all vehicles. Then there's the swivel seat concept. Engineers in the 60s thought elderly and disabled passengers would benefit from seats that rotated outward toward the door for easier entry and exit. A few luxury car makers even offered them as premium options. But here's the nightmare scenario nobody considered properly. In a collision, these seats could rotate freely if the locking mechanism failed. Crash test data eventually showed occupants being spun around violently during impacts, with the rotating mechanism itself causing severe injuries. The locking systems were never reliable enough to guarantee the seat would stay forward-facing during a crash. Modern regulations require seats to be rigidly mounted to handle collision forces properly. Spike steering wheels were actually proposed as a safety feature, believe it or not. The twisted logic was that if drivers had a spike pointing at their chest, they'd drive more carefully. A few experimental vehicles in Europe actually tested this concept in the 70s during some misguided safety campaigns. Obviously, this was insane. Even minor fender benders could result in the driver being impaled. The psychological stress of driving with a spike aimed at your vital organs was immense. Thankfully, this never made it past the concept phase in any production vehicle, and regulations specifically prohibit any sharp or pointed objects in the steering wheel area. External airbags for pedestrian protection seemed brilliant initially. The idea was to have airbags deploy from the hood and windshield area when sensors detected a pedestrian impact. Some luxury manufacturers experimented with these in the early 2000s. The problem was the deployment system couldn't distinguish between a genuine pedestrian strike and other impacts. They'd deploy when hitting shopping carts, debris, or even during minor bumps. When they deployed unexpectedly at speed, they'd completely block the driver's vision, causing secondary accidents that were often worse than the original impact. The technology just wasn't reliable enough, and most countries now ban external airbag systems that can obstruct driver visibility. Ejector seats in cars sound like something from a James Bond movie, but engineers actually explored this. The concept was that in an unavoidable collision, the seat would launch occupants up and out of the vehicle to safety. Soviet engineers tested this in the 70s, and one American startup pitched it in the 80s. Reality check. Ejecting from a car at any speed would send you tumbling through the air with no control, likely to hit other vehicles, trees, or pavement at lethal velocity. The rocket propulsion needed could itself cause spinal injuries. Not to mention you'd need a convertible or explosive charges to blow out the roof. This ridiculous idea never saw production and is explicitly banned under safety regulations, requiring vehicles to contain and protect occupants, not eject them. Pop-up roll bars were popular in convertibles during the 90s and early 2000s. When sensors detected a rollover beginning, hydraulic or pyrotechnic charges would shoot steel bars up behind the seats. Sounds good until you realize the deployment often happened a split second too late. And the bars would slam into passengers' heads with incredible force. There were documented cases of people being knocked unconscious or suffering skull fractures from their own safety equipment. Even worse, the sensors would sometimes trigger during hard cornering or driving over rough terrain, randomly smashing into unsuspecting passengers. Modern regulations require roll protection that's either permanently in place or deploys more gently with better timing systems. Rigid steering columns were standard for decades and killed thousands of people. Early safety advocates actually defended them, arguing that a solid, non-collapsible column gave drivers better control. The horrifying reality was that in frontal crashes, these steel spears would impale drivers, driving straight through their chest cavities. It took until the late 60s for collapsible steering columns to become mandatory. The old rigid designs are now completely banned in new vehicles. It's shocking to think that something so obviously dangerous was not only allowed, but actually defended by some safety experts who prioritized control over survivability. Sharp interior protrusions were everywhere in vintage cars. We're talking metal dash knobs, pointed door handles, rigid sun visor rods, and unpadded metal surfaces throughout the cabin. Designers thought these looked sporty and modern. During accidents, passengers would be sliced, impaled, and bludgeoned by their own car's interior. Regulations now mandate that everything inside the passenger compartment must be recessed, padded, or designed to break away safely. Those beautiful chrome dash knobs from classic cars are death traps by modern standards, and completely illegal in new vehicle production. Non-laminated windshields were standard until the safety glass revolution. Single-pane glass windshields would shatter into large, razor-sharp shards during impacts, decapitating and severely lacerating occupants. Some early safety advocates actually argued this was better because it allowed ejection from the vehicle. That thinking killed countless people. Modern regulations require laminated safety glass that stays intact even when shattered, and anyone manufacturing vehicles with old-style glass windshields would face immediate legal action. Bench seats in the front were nostalgic and allowed 3 people up front, but they were safety disasters. With no separation between driver and passenger, people would slide across the seat during collisions, slamming into each other or being ejected. The lack of proper seatbelt mounting points made restraints less effective. Children would sit in the middle with no protection at all. While not completely banned, modern safety requirements for airbags, seatbelts, and crash testing have made traditional bench seats essentially impossible to certify in new passenger vehicles. Hood ornaments were once the ultimate status symbol. Luxury cars had elaborate metal sculptures mounted on the front, from Jaguar's leaping cat to Mercedes's 3-pointed star standing tall. The problem was these became pedestrian impaling devices during accidents. A person struck by a car would be skewered by these metal decorations, turning a survivable impact into a fatal one. Regulations now require that any hood ornament must be designed to collapse, retract, or break away upon impact. Those classic rigid hood ornaments are banned on new production vehicles. Metal dashboards with no padding were standard in cars through the 50s. Manufacturers used steel and hard plastic, sometimes with decorative ridges and patterns. During collisions, unrestrained passengers would smash face first into these unforgiving surfaces. Facial reconstructive surgeons in the 60s lobbied hard for padded dashes after treating countless patients with catastrophic injuries. Modern regulations require energy-absorbing materials throughout the dashboard, and exposed metal surfaces and impact zones are completely prohibited. Rear-facing third-row seats in station wagons seemed practical for fitting more kids in the car, and everyone from the 70s remembers riding backward in the way back. waving at other drivers. The safety reality was nightmarish. In rear-end collisions, these passengers absorbed the full impact first, with minimal crumple zone protection. The rear glass would shatter over them. In rollovers, they had the least protection. Modern safety standards essentially ban this seating configuration by requiring proper crumple zones and protection for all passengers. Partial door beams were an early attempt at side impact protection. Instead of reinforcing the entire door structure, manufacturers would just add a single beam, usually at waist height. Marketing departments loved promoting this feature. The problem was that impacts above or below the beam offered no protection. In real-world crashes, the doors would still collapse catastrophically, just with one rigid bar that could itself cause injuries. Current regulations require comprehensive side impact protection systems throughout the door structure, making these partial solutions illegal in new vehicles. First-generation airbags from the late 80s and early 90s deployed with such explosive force that they killed more than 100 people, especially children and small adults. The deployment velocity was incredibly violent, designed for large unbelted males. When kids in the front seat or smaller adults were too close during deployment, the airbag itself would cause fatal head and neck injuries. This led to massive recalls and complete redesigns. Current regulations require advanced airbags with sensors that adjust deployment based on occupant size and position. Those early overpowered airbags are banned, and any vehicle still equipped with them is subject to mandatory replacement programs. Smooth, round steering wheels with no grip provided no control during violent maneuvers. Manufacturers thought they looked sleek and modern. During emergency situations, drivers' hands would slip right off, causing loss of control that led to crashes. Modern regulations don't explicitly mandate grip patterns, but safety testing requirements essentially force manufacturers to provide proper steering wheel grip, making the old smooth designs impractical and legally risky to produce. Gasoline heaters mounted in the passenger compartment were popular in cold climates during the 40s and 50s. These devices would burn fuel inside the cabin to provide heat. The carbon monoxide risks were enormous, and numerous people died from poisoning. Fuel leaks would fill the cabin with gasoline vapors. Some caught fire, incinerating occupants. Modern regulations absolutely prohibit any combustion heating system that operates within the sealed passenger compartment. Fake wood paneling might seem like just an aesthetic crime, but certain applications were actually dangerous. Some manufacturers would apply wood-look vinyl over structural areas, hiding crash damage and rust that compromise safety. Others used real wood trim pieces that would splinter into sharp projectiles during crashes. Current safety regulations require that all interior materials meet specific impact and flammability standards that most decorative wood treatments can't pass. Battery placement under the seat was common in some European cars. This saved space and improved weight distribution. The safety problem was catastrophic. During crashes, battery acid would leak onto occupants. The batteries themselves could explode, spraying acid and causing fires right beneath passengers. Electrical shorts could occur directly under someone's body. Modern regulations require batteries to be in protected compartments with proper ventilation and containment systems, making under-seat placement effectively banned. Single-circuit brake systems meant that any failure in the hydraulic system would result in complete brake loss. One leak, one blown seal, and you had no brakes at all. This killed numerous people who found themselves unable to stop. Regulations now mandate dual circuit systems where the brakes are divided into at least two independent hydraulic circuits. If one fails, you still have partial braking capability. Manufacturing vehicles with single-circuit systems is now illegal. Non-collapsing steering wheels would remain rigidly in place during frontal impacts, providing no energy absorption. Combined with rigid steering columns, these were doubly deadly. Modern regulations require steering wheels designed to collapse and deform during impacts, absorbing energy and reducing injury. The old rigid designs that could crush a driver's chest are completely banned. Chrome bumpers were beautiful but functionally useless for safety. These decorative pieces would crumple, detach, or penetrate the vehicle during impacts, They offered minimal pedestrian protection and no energy absorption. Modern regulations require bumpers to meet specific impact standards for pedestrian safety and low-speed collision protection. Those classic chrome bumpers can't meet these standards and are banned on new production vehicles. Lap-only seatbelts without shoulder restraints were standard for decades. The problem was that during frontal crashes, the upper body would jackknife forward violently, causing severe internal injuries, spinal damage, and head trauma. The lap belt itself could cause devastating abdominal injuries. Current regulations require three-point harnesses for all seating positions, making lap-only belts illegal in new vehicles except in specific limited applications like buses. So there you have it. 25 car safety features that seemed like good ideas but turned out to be disasters. Each one of these killed or injured people before regulators stepped in and banned them. It's a reminder that safety innovation isn't always straightforward, and sometimes our attempts to protect people end up doing the opposite. Modern cars are incredibly safe compared to vehicles from even 30 years ago, but we got here through painful trial and error. Next time you buckle up in your modern vehicle with its airbags, crumple zones, and carefully engineered safety systems, remember that every feature exists because someone, somewhere, learned a hard lesson about what doesn't work. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive safety history, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future videos. Drop a comment letting me know which band safety feature shocked you the most. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. One of the most fascinating things about automotive safety history is how it reveals the gap between engineering assumptions and real-world consequences. When designers were creating these features, most of them genuinely believed they were making cars safer. That's what makes this story so important. Safety innovation isn't just about having good intentions. It's about rigorous testing, collecting data from actual accidents, and being willing to admit when something doesn't work. The engineers and manufacturers who dismissed early warning signs about dangerous features weren't necessarily evil or incompetent. They were often just working with incomplete information or following the conventional wisdom of their era. But that's exactly why we now have standardized crash testing, regulatory bodies, and mandatory safety reviews. We learned these lessons the hard way, through tragedy after tragedy, until finally the automotive industry was forced to evolve. What's really interesting is that some of these banned features persisted for decades, even after the dangers became clear. Rigid steering columns, for instance, were known to be deadly as early as the 1950s, yet manufacturers kept installing them because changing production lines was expensive and regulations weren't strong enough yet. It wasn't until public outcry and government mandates forced their hands that collapsible columns became standard. This pattern repeated over and over throughout automotive history. A feature causes injuries and deaths. People warn about it. Manufacturers argue it's fine or too expensive to change. Eventually, regulations catch up and the feature gets banned. Then everyone wonders how it was ever legal in the first place. The spike steering wheel proposal is actually a perfect example of how absurd these ideas could get when logic takes a backseat to misguided thinking. Can you imagine the marketing pitch for that one? Drive safer by being constantly threatened by a spike aimed at your vital organs. It's almost comical if it weren't so dangerous. The evolution of airbag technology is particularly instructive because it shows how even modern safety innovations can have serious, unintended consequences. Those early airbags deployed with such violence that they actually caused more harm than good in many situations. Nobody expected that the solution to collision injuries would itself become a source of fatal injuries. But that's exactly what happened. It took comprehensive research, extensive testing, and a willingness to completely redesign the technology before airbags became the genuine lifesavers they are today. That's the kind of systematic improvement that characterizes modern automotive safety. When a problem emerges, the entire industry doesn't just dismiss it or hope it goes away. Engineers dive deep to understand what went wrong and develop better solutions. Another thing worth considering is how these banned features highlight the importance of standards and regulation. Without government mandates and testing protocols, manufacturers operating in a competitive market have little incentive to spend money on safety innovations that competitors aren't doing. If one company installs expensive protective measures and another cuts corners, guess whose cars are cheaper and more profitable? That competitive pressure is why we need regulations. They level the playing field and force everyone to meet the same minimum safety standards. This is why vehicles manufactured in countries with weak safety regulations tend to be significantly more dangerous than those produced in countries with strict standards. It's not that engineers in developing countries are less competent. It's simply that without regulatory requirements, safety becomes optional. The history of automotive safety also teaches us something about the importance of crash statistics and accident investigation. Before modern data collection methods, manufacturers could deny problems or claim incidents were isolated cases. But once regulators started systematically collecting crash data and investigating failures, patterns became impossible to ignore. When you're looking at thousands of accident reports showing the same failure mode over and over, you can't just shrug it off anymore. This is why modern vehicles are so much safer. We have decades of accumulated data about what works and what doesn't. Engineers can design vehicles using evidence from millions of real-world crashes, rather than just theoretical assumptions. It's also worth noting that some of these banned features represented genuine trade-offs that society had to think through. Swivel seats, for example, legitimately did make life easier for elderly and disabled people who had mobility challenges. The question became whether that convenience benefit was worth the safety risks it introduced. Modern automotive design tries to solve these problems in better ways. Now we have power seats that adjust electronically, grab handles, and vehicle designs that make entry and exit easier without compromising crash safety. We've found ways to achieve the same goals without the dangerous unintended consequences. That's the real lesson here. Better solutions exist if we're willing to keep innovating and investing in research and development. One particularly important insight is that pedestrian safety was largely ignored in early automotive design. Hood ornaments, rigid hoods, and hard edges were designed with the driver and passengers in mind, with almost no consideration for people outside the vehicle. Modern regulations require vehicles to be designed for pedestrian protection too, which means softer hood panels, collapsible structures, and streamlined designs that minimize injury if someone is struck. This represents a fundamental shift in how we think about automotive safety. It's not just about protecting people inside the vehicle anymore, it's about minimizing harm to everyone who might interact with the vehicle, including pedestrians and cyclists. That's a much more comprehensive approach to safety, and it reflects a more mature understanding of our responsibility as a society. The story of automotive safety is really a story about learning through failure and using that knowledge to do better. Every single banned feature exists because someone got hurt or killed, and their tragedy taught us something valuable. It's sobering to think about it that way, but it's also motivating. We don't have to keep making the same mistakes. We can learn from history and build safer vehicles right from the start. That's exactly what modern manufacturers are doing with electric vehicles, autonomous driving systems, and advanced driver assistance technologies. They're building on decades of safety knowledge to create vehicles that are orders of magnitude safer than anything we had even 10 years ago. Thanks so much for watching this journey through automotive safety history. If you found this fascinating, please consider subscribing to see more deep dives into automotive culture, engineering, and history. Leave a comment telling me what surprised you most about these banned safety features. Did you recognize any of these from older vehicles you've seen or ridden in? I'd love to hear your stories. And hey, if you want to stay up to date on all our latest content, hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Until next time, drive safe out there.